Thanks, Chair. Taoiseach, EirGrid this week admitted that there is a reasonable probability that energy supply won't meet demand this winter. And the main reason for that is the proliferation of data centres, consuming now 18% of our electricity, projected to consume 30% by 2030. This uncontrolled growth is incompatible with the need to reduce carbon emissions to zero to halt climate catastrophe. Rather than tackling the root of the problem by banning the construction of more data centres, EirGrid's solution is to construct an LNG or LNG terminals. Supposedly, this is to serve as a backup when data centres' insatiable demand for electricity overwhelms the normal capacity of the grid. The CEO of EirGrid stated on Monday that building an LNG is an urgent matter for the state. Taoiseach, environmental activists in this country have fought for years against LNG terminals. Only last month, they celebrated on Board Pleanála's correct decision to refuse planning permission for a facility in Shannon and hoped that this was the last we would see of this failed approach. But now it seems the government is about to exhume that dead horse in the service of the big tech multinationals. Taoiseach, will you confirm or deny that LNG infrastructure is to be endorsed in the forthcoming energy policy?
Thanks. Thank you, Caoireach. Just in relation to Deputy Dillon's question on Uiscare and Irish Water, and he particularly raised the slow timeline for the Newport storage scheme. That's something I'll make inquiries about personally. I have met with Uiscare about their work programme, and they have been very clear with me that it isn't possible for them to progress all projects at any one time, and even with additional finance. There are limitations around skills and supply chains. So there has to be a pipeline, and the pipeline isn't as fast as any of us would wish it to be. On the issue of the rural water schemes for the villages, very keen to make progress on this so that we can have water schemes in more villages and small settlements, so the small villages can enable a natural increase so that people can build houses in them. Minister Bryan tells me that decision that will be made in the next few weeks, and certainly no later than the end of the year. Just going back to the question he asked in the last segment on the Chief Pharmacy Officer, I'll have to double check with Minister Donnelly about that. Last time I checked, the current thinking was not to have an individual Chief Officer for all professions, pharmacy, speech and language, physiotherapy, I could go on, but to have a single one for all the allied professions. So that was the last thinking on that, but that may have changed. We do have a National Centre for Pharmacoeconomics, which is government funded, headed by Professor Barry, which actually does a lot of the work that a Chief Pharmacy Officer might do in a different jurisdiction. Deputy Boyd Barrett talked about Vienna, mentioned the fact that 60% of all new developments in Vienna are reserved for social and public housing. It will be interesting to know for the Dublin City Council area where we are with that anyway, because a huge amount of the new housing that actually is being built in the Dublin City Council area is social, or cost rental or affordable. It might be the case that even without a rule, it's at 60% already. Not a huge number of private homes for purchase being built in the Dublin City Council area, but it would be worth checking that out. And if you look at the 30,000 new homes that were built last year, the proportion of those that were private homes for sale on the normal market was actually quite small. It could have been as few as a third. And most of those were located around our cities and suburban areas. And I'd actually like to see more homes being built for private purchase by people in all parts of the country, including Dublin City. Deputy Murphy asked about electricity supply. I'm glad to say that we're in a much better place on security of electricity supply than we were this time last year. That is down to the extra generation, both renewable and gas, and the fact that there is a better partnership now between EirGrid and the big energy users, including data centres, which can actually be called on to contribute to the grid because they have generation capacity of their own, particularly when there's issues around supply, and that's rarely part of the debate. The fact that data centres can produce their own energy and contribute to the grid and help solve the problem if there's a shortage of supply. But we're assured that there won't be any red alerts this winter, and unlikely there'll be any amber ones either. Just in relation to LNG infrastructure, that's not about data centres. That is about the issue of gas supply. We're going to need natural gas in Ireland, at least until 2050, if not beyond. Even if we achieve net zero, we'll still use natural gas to a certain extent. We currently only have two ways to get gas onto the island: the UK interconnector and the Corrib gas field. When the Corrib gas field runs out, there'll be only one way to get gas onto the island, and that is a security risk. And we need to do something about that. And there are a number of options available, and we haven't made a decision on that yet. They range from floating LNG to fixed LNG to additional interconnectors, perhaps, to other jurisdictions than the UK. Deputy Callaghan, I heard what he had to say. I feel, once again, it's an example of selective use of statistics, which I think we're all guilty of sometimes. He specifically mentioned the ratio of earnings to average house prices, and he picked 2011 as the base year. If he picks 2007 or 2008 as the base year, you would come to a different conclusion, and I'd encourage you to do the maths on that. When it comes to people owning their own home, and I admit this is selective use statistics, but if Deputy Callaghan can do it, so can I. The number of people who own their own home in Ireland is at a record high, 1.2 million. We know that from the census. Yes, in percentage terms, it's fallen, but it's still 69% when you exclude those who are not stated, and that's pretty high by international standards, but not high enough in my view, and that's why we're prioritising home ownership. Deputy Murray, I'll have to go back to you on your question in relation to gaming. I might ask Minister McGrath to do that, but I know it's designed to encourage more of the gaming industry to base their operations here in Ireland, and I think we're seeing signs of that already.